You're good to go, Dr. Kathryn. Let's start.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session with the Early Child Development Forum. I'm Dr. Kathryn Murray, and I'm going to be leading us through an hour around digital technologies, the brain, and how we set up our classroom environment. I'm just going to pause for a moment and share my screen with you because I've prepared a little PowerPoint that we can be led by. If I can find it just really quickly. Here it is. So I'll just make that a little bigger for us. And there it is. All right, so let's start. So I'm going to be talking today about harmonizing the brain, the environment, and digital technologies in the early childhood learning spaces. I'm from Australia, and it's my great pleasure to be aligned with ECDF, and I have been now for a few years, and support their work that they do for underprivileged people in India, and particularly early childhood, in the early childhood area, and many other projects that they work on. So I'm Dr. Kathryn Murray, and I am from Australia, as I said, and I'm an early childhood specialist. And I've also developed a pedagogy called BrainSet. And it's the BrainSet environments formula that we'll be working through today, and aligning how important it is for us to understand how a young child's brain develops and how we can support that and add to that and give them opportunities for learning by the environments that we set up. So I have quite a few qualifications there, but my proudest one is that I'm the mother of 4 young adults now, and they are actually my greatest achievement. So with that said, I'd like to lead us through this session now. And I want to start with a question to you. When you're thinking about learning environments for young children, what sort of environment do you think of? Because this adds to your beliefs. It sort of reflects the beliefs that you have about your teaching approach, the beliefs that you have around child development, and also the beliefs that you have around the image of the child. So if you think children are capable and competent and strong and able to rise to challenges and be able to explore and discover things for themselves, you'll set up a classroom environment that might be a little bit different than if you just felt that children were innocent and quiet and just needed to be shown everything and weren't capable of creating their own interest or capable of creating their own environments. So your area might look a little different when you're working with children. So I'd ask you to look at these 2 images below, the one on the left and the one on the right, and think really which one would you rather be in if you were a child and you were in an early learning centre or a childcare space to learn day after day. Because remember, children spend a lot of time in the environment with us. We spend a lot of time in that environment. So we need to make sure that the environment is conducive to learning, and it's conducive to how children are developing and how their brain is developing and what their brain needs. And that's what I really want to focus on today. The use of digital technologies is really just a tool. It's a tool that we use when we're helping children to learn something, learn a concept. Just a tool. It's the same as a paintbrush, it's the same as paper, it's the same as a pencil. We choose to use digital technologies when that's the best option for children to learn the concepts that we want to teach. So I'm not going to ask you to share which side that you like, which image that you like, but really think about it and reflect on which one are you drawn to, particularly if you were an adult working in the space or if you were a child working in the space. Now, both of these centres that I'm showing you are from America, and they both have very different styles and both have very different purposes, but they also both reflect the image of the child that the teacher has, and also the belief that the teacher has around the needs of the children. So I want us to think about this point too, that in early childhood, in those early childhood years, we are really important parts of a young child's development. Because when a child is born, their brain is fully developed. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's continually developing, because it still has 90% to go. And that just means that synapses are being developed, neural pathways within the brain are being developed. And that all happens because of the experiences that we offer young children. Sensory experiences such as taste, smell, sight, hearing, touch. All of those sensory experiences add to the synapses that are being developed in the brain and the neural pathways that are deepening and developing in the brain. So in those first 5 years of life, we see a whole stack of dendrites being developed all through the brain with all these different neural pathways happening. And that happens in a developing child, a normal developing child. But to deepen those neural pathways and to help the growth of all of the synapses and the myelination and all these wonderful things that are happening in a young child's brain, children need to be exposed to experiences that are going to allow them to extend themselves and to be able to discover new experiences. Children are born natural explorers. So we need to give them opportunities to explore. We need to give them different things to challenge them. We need to let them repeat things, do things over and over and over again to deepen those neural pathways, and then give them something a little different. So those neural pathways spread a little. It's because they have to think in a different direction. So it's really important in these first 5 years of life that we make sure that we are giving children many opportunities to allow the brain to fully develop. And that's where the environment comes in, and the tools that we use within that environment to make sure that we are extending children. Because we want to develop the whole child. We're looking for holistic development here. We're looking to develop those physical domains, the fine motor, the gross motor. So being able to hold a pencil, being able to pull themselves up on a rope, all of those physical areas in their development. We need to help them develop socially. So making friends, knowing what to say, how to get into a game. Emotionally, how to manage not being the first in the line, how to cope with being upset, how to become more resilient, how to take a turn. All of these things are really important for life, because we are building life skills, not just skills for now. The cognitive skills, thinking, problem solving, understanding, making decisions. And then we have the language, communicating, collaborating, negotiating, as well as those normal developmental domains that we're all developing all the time. We also need to think about what's going on in the brain. How can we support that additional development in the brain? And from my experience, talking about BrainSet globally and training educators across the world, I've found that most people are really comfortable with the left-hand side there, all of those different domains, but not many of us are thinking about what's going on in a child's brain and how does what we do affect what happens in the brain. And that's what I want to talk about today. The brain works on relationships, like we all do. We all, hinge our whole lives really on relationships. We're social beings. Naturally, human beings are social beings. So relationships are very important to us. So many years ago, they did a study on how a child's brain lights up in relationships. So they put this little electrode cap on this little baby here, and it didn't hurt at all. And then they watched how the synapses fired from different stimulus. The first stimulus was just a photo of a number. Let's say it was number 6. So the child's brain lit up for about 30 seconds. So they saw all of these electrical impulses going off in the brain. And the researchers thought, oh, this is great. To see this stimulation. Then they showed a photo of a woman smiling at this baby. It wasn't the mother, but it was a woman that was looking straight at the baby, eye contact, big smile, and it was just a photo. Guess how long the baby's brain lit up, all of those electrical impulses lit up? 30 minutes. So it just goes to show the difference that eye contact and a smile makes to stimulate the brain and build those relationships. It's really important. It's really important that we do a lot of these things as teachers and educators, so that we are supporting the whole development of the whole child. That brings me to BrainSet and my BrainSet environments formula. This has been developed over 40 years. I've been in this education game for about 40 years now, and BrainSet has been something that I played with in the 25 years that I was a classroom teacher. I've been a university lecturer for about 12 years, and along with that, I've been doing some consultancy work, and now I have Future Strong Education, my consultancy business based in Australia, but I work globally. And so over this time, I've obviously read a lot of research about the brain and about environments, and I continue to read research because we never know enough, do we? And BrainSet was born. And now I've been talking with many people across the world about BrainSet and training people, and people have been implementing my pedagogy and strategies into their classroom after they've been trained by me or my two trainers, Sue Allingham and Kavita Tanner. And we have seen huge differences in the way children interact with each other, and also with their classroom environment. We've seen the classrooms have become much calmer. Teachers are calmer, so they have the time to talk to each other about what's happening with the children and about different provocations and different things that they can put into the classroom. So we have the teachers calmer, which means their well-being is better. We have the children being more engaged. They feel less threatened because of the way that I share to set up the environment for them to learn. They're more engaged, they're more focused, they're less threatened. Oral communication and oral language increases. And we all know that that's the beginning of literacy, beginning of reading and writing. So we know all of this is happening and going on as these lifelong skills are being developed. And that's what I want to share with you as we move forward today. So before we can move forward, we sort of have to have a little understanding of what's going on in the brain. So simplistically, I want to talk about the brain as really just having three levels. So if we imagine we have the brain stem at the base of our skull, and the brain stem, of course, connects our brain to our spinal cord. Then we have that's our survival part of the brain, and I'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Up here behind our ear is where the limbic system lives, and there's a little gland in there called the amygdala, and the amygdala works on feelings, emotions. So it's sort of like our emotional register, I guess. So if we're feeling happy, that's where we feel it first, and then it tells the rest of the brain, oh, we're happy, let's smile. And so our muscles come into play. So the survival part of the brain really manages our breathing, our heart rate, our blinking of our eyes, all of those things to keep us alive. That's the part of the body that at all costs will keep us alive. This part of our brain is the one that it's sort of like the meter. How are we doing? Are we okay? If we're under threat, well, then this limbic system talks to the brainstem and says, we're under threat. We need to get out of here. So then we come into the fight, flight, or freeze responses. So the flight is, let's get out of here, let's run away, or let's defend ourselves, let's fight our way out of this, or let's just freeze, let's just pretend we don't hear what's going on, or let's just not talk so we don't get ourselves into any more trouble. So those two parts of the brain work together. Now, when we have trauma or we experience trauma, the brain is flooded with cortisol, and cortisol seeps up into this top area of the brain here, the neocortex, and that's where the thinking happens. But if there's a whole lot of cortisol floating around in the brain, that's when we get foggy brain and we can't really think clearly. So what we need to do is calm the brain, and we can calm the brain by what we do as adults, but also making sure that the environment is set up in a way that calms the brain. My mantra is a calm brain is a thinking brain. And if you remember nothing else from today, please remember that. A calm brain is a thinking brain. So we need to really make sure that children are feeling calm so that these two lower parts of the brain can harmonize with this top part of the brain. And that's where all the thinking happens, and the memory here in the prefrontal cortex, and the decision making and the problem solving, and all of those great things that have happened in this frontal region going back. But it's built on these two lower areas harmonizing. So it's really important that we make sure that the brain is looked after before we can expect children to really learn and really understand what's happening and what's going on. So that's where the set comes into the brain set, the survival, emotions, and the thinking parts of the brain. And once we understand that, then we can look at our three pillars. And within the three pillars of brain set, there are about 16 elements. And these are just design styles, I guess, things that we can implement into the room to make sure that we're taking care of the S, the E, and the T. So in the survival part of the brain, so to address that particular brainstem area, we have designs for learning. And there's a few different characteristics there that we'll go into. Then in the limbic system, we have the emotional part, and that's the feelings for learning. And then for the thinking part, to support the thinking part of the brain, we have different spaces for learning. But always in the middle is the child. The child features in this throughout all of our room design and all of our thinking about the brain and all about our holistic development. The child is always at the center of our thinking, of our planning, of our pedagogy, the way we talk to the children, the way we set up the environment. The child is always at the center, and the child's interests are at the center as well. So this is usually a 5-week training course that I have with early childhood educators across the world, whether it be online or whether it be face-to-face. We can fast track it to a weekend sometimes, but I'm really squeezing a lot into an hour. So I won't be able to show you all of the design features that I have here, all of the elements, but you'll be able to see enough to get a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about the brain set environments. And you'll see these different elements sprinkled through many of the photos that I'm showing you, because none of these are in isolation. Because we are looking for a holistic approach to teaching children, of course, our room is also based on a holistic approach. So you'll see these elements in many of the images. But to make sure that we have that we are addressing the survival, the emotional, and the thinking parts of the brain, I've divided these up so that we're sure that we've got them covered. So in the survival part of the brain, remember that's the brain stem, we build little defined spaces for children. We have this thing called wayfinding. We make sure that the roof or the ceiling lines are a little lower. We think about the acoustics, how loud it is in the room. We think about the type of lighting that we have in the room. And we think about these things called rounded corners. So let's have a look. We always set up purposeful and intentional defined spaces. Now, the defined space could be a mat on the floor. It could be 4 cushions on the floor. It could be a table and chairs, and they're small spaces. So I know that across the world, people work in different situations, obviously. And some people work in small rooms with lots of children. Some people work in large rooms with lots of children. Some people work in big rooms with very few children and small rooms with very few children. So there's a whole range of different setups in your classroom that I'm aware of. But the concepts remain the same. And then these are things that I guide you through. If you've got a really large room or a really small room, I guide you through how to set up the room individually. But think of the concepts as we go through this very general presentation. So we want the defined spaces with just enough space for really 1, 2, 3, 4, at the most 6 children. We don't want any more than that in each of these defined spaces, because we're trying to develop little spaces, multiple small spaces in our learning environment that children feel less threatened in. So if there's only you and somebody else, it's not really very threatening. Or if it's just you at a table working with the materials that have been placed on the table for you, it's not threatening. And if there's somebody else near you, you will talk to them. And so your oral language will develop, your communication skills will develop in a non-threatening way. You'll also be more engaged because you're just working with what's in front of you. So you can see on the left-hand side there, this is a bead threading little area, and that was taken from the children's interest because they were talking about jewelry shops and making jewelry. So the teacher has put a range of different beads and some wire there that children can thread using some wire. Now the wire wasn't just put there. The children were shown explicitly in one of the meeting spaces that I'll show you later. The children were explicitly shown how to use the wire so that it was managed and handled safely. And of course they started with some sort of thread first and graduated to the wire. But that's a threading station. And it's just, you can see it's for 2 people. So you can see there's 2 brown long trays there that indicate that that's for each child. There's 2 chairs, indicates that that's for each child. There's some stimulus on the wall to give them some ideas of what they might do. There's no example there that says you have to do it this way. It's an open-ended space so that children can use those materials however they want. They might not use that wire at all to do any threading, and that's okay. It's been put there to generate skills in that space. Now on the right-hand side, this is a different space, but you can see how the tables have been laid out intentionally. You can see that they have carefully had things put on them with a tablecloth and another placemat, and then some beautiful natural materials that go along with that. On the one on the right, you can see it's on a round mat on the floor. And you can see that they've got something through the middle for a little bit of interest. They've got some paper there. They've got little clipboards for writing. And that's what we want everywhere, so that children have the opportunity to write if they want to. And there's an idea there of what they can do using those word cards. So they're 2 intentional spaces, and they're defined spaces in the room. We also want to be mindful of the ceiling lines. Many of our rooms are quite high, have high ceilings. And if that's the case, imagine how it is when you're only this tall and you're looking way up at the ceiling. So to bring that down for that sense of safety, that's what we're aiming for here, the sense of safety. We bring the ceiling down by using loops of material like you can see behind this little baby. This baby's about 18 months to 2, I think he is. You can see that there's natural materials being placed there. You can see that there's nice little soft fairy lights behind, and you can see that there's a soft couch and some floor mats. And this is, a lovely, soft, gentle room. Now you might say, well, my room doesn't look anything like that. I can't do things like that. Maybe you can adapt what you do have so that the concepts are the same. Your room might not look like this, but the concept that you're putting into the room, you could probably do that. So we have rounded corners too, because in the brain, if something is rounded or curved, it has that sense of safety. The brain sees it as being safer than a sharp corner of a shelf. And so here you see we've got some furniture that is rounded as well, sort of curved furniture, round tables, round mats on the floor, just to give that sense of the rounded corners for the brain. If you don't have the rounded corners, that's okay. It just means you put your normal shelving that's got the square corners, just put it at a bit of an angle so that it's not all hard and sharp and at right angles. So rounded corners is important for the brain to get that sense of safety. The natural light, we could turn off those overhead lights because there's so much beautiful outside light, and those fluorescent lights that you can see from the ceiling there have a bit of a hum, and it's a bit like a mosquito being in your ear if you're oversensitive to that. So you could turn those off easily and use that natural light. You can see that there's different elements of things that I've just said. You can see that there's some rounded corners there. You can see there's defined spaces. You can see that some of the furniture is turned at an angle. There's some soft cushions and soft furnishings there. Now, what we have to be mindful of when we're in a big room like this is that we don't have running spaces. We don't want to be inviting the children to find like a corridor and just run and see it like a running track, because, you know, children are children and that's what they'll do. So maybe moving the furniture out a little bit so it's sort of more zigzaggy, not so straight lined, would be helpful in this particular room. So now we're moving on to emotions. So as I said, I don't have time to show you all of the elements in this short presentation, but hopefully you're getting the idea of what we're talking about when we talk about brain set. So we've just done the survival part of the brain. We've just talked about the brain stem and how the brain stem needs to experience safety. The brain needs to be able to look around the room and go, oh yeah, okay, it's pretty safe here. We'll be okay here. Now, when we move up into the emotional part of the brain where the amygdala is, it's just as important to have that sense of safety. But now the brain is feeling safe. And when we're building those relationships, as I talked about right at the very beginning, as we build those relationships, we will be also embedding the feelings of being valued, being wanted, being appreciated. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're really working up at that the triangle of needs, because we're making sure that there's that sense of safety. We're also making sure that children are feeling as though they're valued, their self-esteem is growing, their confidence is growing. And so those emotions blend into the furnishings that we put in the room, because we're trying to make our beautiful rooms more home-like, less institutional and more home-like, so that there is that feeling of familiarity. There is that feeling of, oh, it's okay here. I'm all right here. And when there's lots of children in a room day after day, we need to make sure that there's multiple little defined spaces so that children can go to different spaces at any given time. There's only a few children in each space, so we need multiple spaces. And that might sound a little crazy. That might sound like, oh, you know we've got lots of children. We need to have bigger spaces for them to work in. But really, if you divide your room up and you have smaller spaces, smaller, purposeful, defined spaces, you'll find that the children are more engaged and that the learning is much deeper, because there isn't the big group. There are small little groups, and children feel safer in the small groups. And that leads to us building this emotional connection with the room. When children, or when we all of us have strong emotions, we tend to remember things more. So think about when something happened to you in your teenage years. Think about when you hear a song, and that takes you right back to when you had your first boyfriend or first girlfriend, and that song triggers that memory. That's because the memory is strong, because back then the emotion was strong. And that's what we want to develop in our classrooms too. We want children to have strong emotions about what they're doing and fall in love with the learning that they're doing. And we do that by the way we set up our environment and the way we build relationships with children. And that's part of the pedagogical process that I teach you during the training as well. But we're talking more about the environment in this section and how we can add to that. Now, you might think, well, I haven't spoken much about digital technologies yet. Where are the iPads? Where are the computers? Where is that happening? That is all part of your normal teaching. If you think an iPad is the best way for you to deliver something, or if you want to use iPads to take photos of the children doing something in particular in the room and then talk about it, show it as a photo and then talk about it later as part of your reflection, that's using digital technologies in your room, but it's using it as a tool. It's not using it as just a medium for what children to just do an activity. So it's not just having 6 of them on a table and having a maths app or a literacy app on it, and the children sit and they just work on the iPads. We are all about conversation. We're all about developing relationships, and really you can't develop much of a relationship with an iPad, but we can use it for learning. And so if you're thinking about where do the iPads and where does this digital technology fit in, that's where it fits in. We use it as a tool. And so the iPads could be for researching, they could be for showing a YouTube clip, it could be for finding a picture or an image of something to show children, or children can find these things themselves too once you show them. It can be for taking photos, it can be for taking different photos and comparing things. It can be done in a range of different ways. But in BrainSet, there's no real space for like a bank of digital technology areas where children are just sitting working with iPads or working on the computers. They're used as a tool in our normal teaching, just like we've always done. We've always just used different tools to help support the learning of children. Technology is just another one. I've been around 40 years, so I've seen different fads and different ideas come and go over time, and technology is just another one. But when we're building these emotional connections with our room, we have to be mindful of the furnishings that we use, the type of colours that we have in the room, the type of lights that we use, this thing called psychological safety that there's been quite a lot written about recently, and this connection to nature. We all know that nature calms us, and the way we interact is different. The dynamic is different when we're outside to when we're inside. So bringing some of that nature in is really important. Having these soft environments, these soft furnishings is important too. So you see the one on the left, we looked at that one before in our very opening photo, and I asked you which room that you preferred. You can see on the one on the right, and on the one on the left, there's little baskets of little things that children can fiddle with. There's some soft lighting in that one on the right-hand side there. You can see in the corner, it's a more home-like environment. You can see the one on the right, they've put like a curtain over the top of the couch to make it feel cozier, a little bit more like a cubby house, I guess. A little bit safer. So they're trying to still instill that sense of safety and that feeling of being cozy and warm and safe. You can see that mirrors are used as well, particularly on that left-hand side one. That the use of mirrors is important for young children, because we all know how much young children like to look at themselves in the mirror, don't we? And that happens again around teenage time. But young children are egocentric, so they like to be looking at themselves in the mirror. So the use of mirrors is really important as well. You can see here we have the small little environments set up across the room. This teacher has used an umbrella in the classroom to have that sense of safety, to pull the ceiling level down, because this is a very high ceiling in this particular classroom. And here we can see the elements of wayfinding. And wayfinding is really just so that the child can see which area to go to next. It's the clear vision. I'd sort of like a round table to be in the middle there instead of that square table, maybe a round table if that was available, and that helps with the rounded corners and that feeling and that sense of safety. But it's really so that the vision is clear, so that children can see how to bounce from one area to the next. And in saying about the round table there, I want to acknowledge these photos that have come from many centres from across the world, that all of them have elements of brain set. None of them are totally perfect because none of us are totally perfect. But I want us to focus on the highlighted things, the positive elements of brain set that you can see in all of these. So these photos are definitely not being shared for any criticism or any comparison at all. These are shared for the purpose of this presentation so that you can see the different elements of brain set. And this is where the brain set elements have been combined in this little space here on the left. And over here on the right, we have some other elements of brain set. You can see the big mirror on the wall. You can see that they have used the curtaining on the ceiling to lower that ceiling line and to make that space a little more defined. You can see that there's a mat on the floor to define the space. They've used rounded tables and a round mat where they could. You can see that there's soft lighting there, and they've given some thought into the entryways and exit ways into this space. On the left of that, on the right-hand photo, but on the very left of the photo, there's a little arch, and that's sort of the entryway, the main entryway into this space. But there's also entryways from this right-handed side as well, so that children have choice. Entries and exits are important for young children, and that's a sense of safety as well, so that they're not feeling as though they're trapped in that space. Children who have experienced trauma are on hyper alert for feeling trapped, for not knowing what's going on behind them. So we need to be mindful of those elements as well when we're situating our resources and our materials in our room, when we're setting up the environment. So we also can use these soft sparkly lights, these little fairy lights, and they give the room a really nice feel. It's soft and it's gentle and it's warm and it's cozy. And you can see here, again, different elements of brain set. You can see the rounded mats, and you don't have to have a round mat, but these are the elements that are here. So I'm pointing them out. You also see that the shelving is on an angle. There's one chair there underneath the curtaining where the little lights are, and that's a chair for one. So one child can go and sit there and have some time to themselves. On the left-hand side of that photo, you can see that there's some books, and there's also some cushions on the round mat that's on the floor. So children can sit on the cushions on the floor, they can sit on that chair, they can read their books, they can just have some time away from everybody else. And you know what, we all need that, don't we? And as teachers, I think it's good practice if we actually model that. If sometimes we go and sit in that chair and just have a little bit of a look through a book. And if a child comes and asks you what you're doing, you say, I'm just having a little bit of chill out time, just having a little bit of time before I go back and start talking to people again. And so children then can see that it's okay. It's okay to have some time out to yourself. You can see at the back of that photo, there's another round mat and a round table, and it's a more defined space there. That table doesn't have any provocations or anything on it very much. So it's not as set up as intentionally as we saw in some of the other images. So children have to be invited to the spaces and shown what to do, or given an invitation as to what they could do in that space. We want open-ended materials and open-ended opportunities for children to learn, because remember, we talked about the synapses and the neural pathways right in the very beginning, and about the development of 90% of the brain. So that's why we have to give a range of different spaces and a range of different materials for young children to learn with. Here's just a little pokey little corner that the teacher has used. You can see that there's a floor lamp that has been put in this space. There's flowers on the table, there's rounded corners, and you can see the sparkly lights. She's just gotten some battery operated lights and wrapped them around a hoop and hung them from the ceiling to make that nice little halo of lights. and made that a dramatic space, a dramatic play space where children can go into that little area. It's only a small area in this particular room. Having taken this photo, I can tell you it's a very small area, but it works, and it's purposeful, and it's designed in a way that children will be invited in. There's not a lot of different entries and exits like in the previous one that we looked at, but they have made use of the space in the best way that they can. Adding in nature is, of course, a valuable thing to do. Nature is very calming. Nature is very soothing. And it helps change the whole outlook of children. Many of these concepts that I'm talking to you about for inside, for our rooms, can also be taken outside. So having smaller little spaces set up outside is appropriate as well. Having defined little cubby house areas outside is appropriate, because children's brains don't change just because they're inside or they're outside, and our brains don't either. So, you know, we feel a lot calmer and a lot safer, and have more emotional connection to our rooms when they're looking interesting, when they're looking good, when they're looking defined. And you'll notice that in all of the spaces that I've shown you, they're relatively tidy. And of course, when children are in using them, of course, they're not always tidy. They don't always look the way that I'm showing you. And of course, when you first start implementing this into your room, if you choose to, of course, children will pull things out a lot more, and you know, it will look a little bit messier at the beginning until they realize that this is the way the room is set up now, and these particular materials go here and these go here, and this is the way we look after our room. So it takes a little bit of time for the children to get to learn this approach, the same as you. So it doesn't happen overnight, but with training that we do, the three of us do, we can work through that with you and help you with that. You can see on the left-hand side there that we have a mirror. A mirror has been used, and children are sifting and sorting the natural plants that have been brought from outside, probably picked with the children and brought inside. And there's little stones and rocks, so patterns can be made. So there's some mathematics happening there. The photo in the middle has got the plants in it, of course, but I also wanted to show you those see-through the shelving there that children can see through. And that too adds to that sense of safety, because they can see what's on the other side of the shelf. It's not like a brick wall. And you can see there's some interesting artifacts that have been placed on the shelving as well, as along with the plants at the top. Now on the right, excuse me, we've used some baskets, some natural baskets with some natural materials, and then left it fairly open for however the children want to use those particular provocations. They can be used for collage, they can be used for pattern making, they can be used for design. The children might take some of those little sticks, paddle pop sticks, and they might take them over into the dramatic play area and use them as knives and forks. And that's okay, because that's symbolic play, that's Piaget's symbolic play, and that's okay, we can do that. And you know, part of our resetting the room when we're wanting to move back and put things back to where they came from, and we reset them, part of that is saying to the children, okay, if you've taken any of these materials over into the dramatic play area, you need to bring them back. So that's part of the teaching and part of our training. And remember, we're setting these children up with skills for life. So if they take something from one space, that's okay, but it needs to be returned back to the same space after it's been used. And that's just life, isn't it? That's just life skills. Now, our last area, because we've talked about the survival part and the brainstem, we've talked about the emotional area of your brain and the amygdala and the feelings. And now we're going to be talking about the neocortex here. I don't have time to talk to you about the executive functioning skills that are really housed toward the front of your brain that connects all of this together as well. We don't have time for that today, but just know that this neocortex is the thinking part of the brain. And when these lower two areas are harmonized, then this part can shine. We can remember clearly, we can make decisions, we can solve problems, we can collaborate easier with other people, because these two areas, the lower parts of the brain, are in alignment and are harmonizing and humming together. So in our rooms, we have a range of different spaces for thinking and learning. So we have bigger learning spaces. So, we have learning spaces where children can be really engaged. So they're the defined spaces. So there's engagement. We have recalibration spaces, little respite centres where children can get away from everybody else. And we've talked about that a little earlier. We've got a meeting space. So that's like your big carpet area for explicit teaching, talking to the whole group, or doing some songs, or doing some games, or reading the children a story. That's your meeting space. And that's for showing explicit skills. So remember, we talked about the threading with the wire earlier. Before that would have happened, the teacher would have used the meeting space for explicit teaching, explicitly showing children how to use the wire so that they're safe. The proximity space, that's for a single child or a small group of children or two children, so they're in proximity with each other. So oral language can happen a little more easily. Even though there's a couple of children side by side, they're not feeling threatened. Then we have flexible thinking spaces, and that's just different types of seating. That can be cushions on the floor, that can be standing tables, that can be just normal tables and chairs. It can be a range of different ways that we can seat ourselves. So here we have a range of different spaces and a range of different elements from BrainSet. I'm just going to pause for a moment and let you have a really good look at this image and see what elements that you can see before we go through them. So the first thing that probably pops out to you is the rounded mats. There's a rounded table on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, those mirrors that you can see on the back of the shelving there, they're rounded as well. You can see a little round mat with the puzzle on the floor, and curved boxes that are on the floor. You can see the nature. You can see the shelving unit is at a bit of an angle. You can see that wayfinding is pretty clear. Although there might be a little bit of a running track down this right side, but wayfinding is clear. The children can see where to go from one space to the next. You can see that the ceiling line has been dropped. The fluoro lights are on, but in this particular room, there's only windows at this end. So perhaps some of those lights need to be on. It's good if you have a switch where you can have some of the lights on and not others. If you can do that, that makes a big difference as well. So you can see that there's a range of different spaces and places that have been developed in this room. You can see that there are learning spaces. So on the right-hand side where the tables and chairs are, you can see that there's the meeting space. In the round mat near where that plant is, that's the explicit teaching area. There's proximity spaces for a single child or a small group of children at the front here where that puzzle is on the floor. And flexible seating, they can sit on those boxes, they can sit on the floor, they can sit on the chairs. And toward the back, there's a standing area as well where children can stand and do their work. So in this photo, you can see that there's already a range of different BrainSet elements that have been placed in the room. Remember right at the very beginning, I said that in the room, you'll have an overlap of all of these elements, my 16 elements you'll see throughout the room. And that's the way it's supposed to be. It's not meant to be segregated. So this is the area where your brain feels safe, and this is where we build your feelings, your emotions. That's not the way it works. It really is about blending and looking at the room holistically, just as we look at a child holistically. Another image of the same ideas. This is that same room on the left-hand side here. This is the same room that we showed you in the previous image. It's just taken from the other angle. So you can see that there is that meeting space, and they have another proximity space on this side of that shelving. Remember, the puzzle was on the floor on the other side of the shelving. And you can see behind that there is the single chair with the books. And you can see on the right-hand side, in the right image, I mean, we've looked at this one before too. And again, we're talking about the respite areas, or the space for just one child to work on. On the floor mat at the bottom there, there's just 2 cushions on that mat. So there's a space for two children to lie on the floor and read books. Another child sitting in the chair. So in this room, there's lots of different spaces for engagement, for explicit teaching, for single children, little groups of children, pairs, and there's lots of different seating arrangements, and it's sprinkled throughout the whole room. So it's interesting for the child. One of the other brain rules is that we keep things interesting. The brain doesn't do boring. The brain just turns off if things are boring and starts thinking about something else that's not so boring. So we need to keep our rooms dynamic and alive and moving, and having these multiple defined small spaces within the room does that. And as I said earlier, whether your room is large with lots of children, small with lots of children, we can find ways to embed these concepts into the spaces. Recalibration space can just be something really easy. It can just be a chair. It can be something cute like this, that is a homemade sort of little cubby house in a centre in New Zealand. And the one on the left is in Australia, and this one is in China, or in Asia. So this is just a standing up shelf. So this is the same sort of thing, recalibration space, but it's a standing up space with interesting things on the shelving unit. A recalibration space can also just be one little space set aside with some, that's just a tray of sand and some shelves and a little rake, one of those Zen rakes, for calmness, and a book that goes with it. So what's important too, that I didn't point out, is that in all of the spaces, it's important to have literacy. It's important to have a book, and it's important to have something to write on. So a clipboard and some pencils, or paint and, and crayons or something, so that children are encouraged to write or encouraged to count. So that literacy and numeracy is sprinkled everywhere throughout the room. So it's not as hard as it you might think. And if you're wanting to implement some of this into your room, I can certainly help you with that, or you can try some of these things. If you have a look at this room, this is the original way the room was when I walked into it, and I was working with the teachers in this room. And you can see on the front, there's a little round table on that round mat, but there's not much on it, right? And behind that is an adult-sized table with 2 adult-sized chairs. And there's not a lot on the other side as well, on the other side of the room. So making just small little changes. So keep your eye on that first front table, the little round one. And just by making a few little changes, by putting some books on it, by opening a book, so you're inviting the child to that round table, having a couple of clipboards with pencils and having a couple of cushions on the floor, gives it a bit more interest and invites the child in to see what's going on at that table. The bigger table that you saw on the left-hand side, the adult table that had nothing on it, I just found this is like a throw rug. It's got a bit of texture to it, and I used it as a tablecloth. And I found a bird's nest that was in the room somewhere else, just tucked away. And I got a book about homes and about birds, a couple of clipboards. I've made a couple of layers. So I've got the wooden round tray, then I've got some material, then I've got a coffee cup, and with pens and pencils in the coffee cup. And behind that, I've got a couple of books and a couple of little treasure chest things. And I've left things hanging out of the treasure chest. So it's interesting. So children will go, oh, I wonder what's in there. And they'll open it up and find all these different little treasures that they can use on that table. And those little changes probably took me maybe 4 minutes to do both tables. By the time I found the things that are in the room and set them up on the tables, it really didn't take very long. And that was just a really quick job. So you can imagine how quick and easy you could do this once you know what's in your room, and you can make these small but significant changes. Here's another one. This was in a centre in America, and this is nice. This looks good. And when I first saw it, I thought, yeah, this is a nice little space. It just needs a little more definition. So we started with this, with the curtaining was just hanging behind it with the lamp that was there. And we just changed it to this. All we did was open up that curtaining and pull it around that little space, push it back against the wall a little more, so it's a little cozier. And now it's more inviting, that you sort of want to go in there and see what's in there, because it's like you're in this little cave or in like a little cubby house. So small but significant changes can make all the difference. But of course, it's not just all about what we want and what we think in the room. And that's part of the training I do too, how we can work with the children to make sure that the children are getting what they need developmentally and based on their interests. And that's part of the planning that we go through as well, and the whole pedagogy of BrainSet. Because we're really wanting to develop all of these skills. We want children to be developing lifelong skills. So we want them to be creative and be able to use their imagination. We want them to be able to think for themselves and make decisions and solve problems and work with other people in a positive way. We want them to be able to communicate freely and well and clearly. We want them to build their confidence, and by carefully putting in the spaces and defining the spaces, and by carefully choosing the provocations that you put in there, you'll build confidence, because they will be successful in what they do. That builds their self-esteem. That allows them to be stronger and more resilient and take a few risks in their learning. It builds that oral language, because they're talking to other people. There's literacy development, there's numeracy development, there's engagement, there's focus, negotiating with other people. They're learning how to manage their emotions and learning how to manage their behaviours in smaller, non-threatened places. So you might say, yeah, okay, that's great. Where are the computers and technology? Because that's the era that we're moving into, and children need to know these skills. And of course they do, but technology is just the tool that supports the learning. And as you're using a tool, you teach the children how to use it, just like we do when we're teaching them how to use charcoal, or we're teaching them how to use scissors. We teach them how to use this tool and the purpose of the tool. And technology is the same. And we can use it to support our own planning and our assessment of the learning. We can use the technology for sure. And that supports our learning as well. But it is just a tool. So just to finish up, I'm wanting to pose a few questions to you. When you're thinking about the area that you work in, your room, your environment, your whole centre's environment, I am going to ask you a few questions now. So what if we all focused on constructivism, making sure that there was opportunities for discovery, exploration, safety experiences built with emotion? What if we focused on process learning? So it's all about what's going on during the learning, not the end product. Whether the children make an elephant or whether they make a pig, it doesn't matter. It's that process that they go through to build anything that's important. What if we focused on our design of our learning environment, having small, multiple, defined, interesting learning spaces that are intentionally and purposely put together? What if we focused on a range of developmentally appropriate resources that we can add into or take out of the spaces to promote creativity and discovery? What if we used technology as a tool so that all children can access the curriculum? Because some children may need some assistance with that. So there are assistive technologies for children with special needs or have additional needs. And there is some technology that can help them access the curriculum a little more easily. And that helps with equity, and that helps with diversity in our planning. And what if we focused on having this laser focus on communicating? Because in life, communication is the skill that we all need, and building those human relationships in all year levels So not only in early childhood, but in primary and elementary classrooms as well, even high school classrooms, rather than having all of these benchmarks that children have to reach. What if we just focused on communication, relationships, and building strengths and abilities in all children? And we can do that by some of these images that are on the right there. We've got some open-ended materials outside. We've got loose parts out of the shed there that have been used on the ground. And we have that image that we saw earlier with the dramatic play space. So what if we focused on some of these things in our room? I also want to leave you with this quote that I really love. This is my favorite one. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And that, along with my mantra of a calm brain is a thinking brain, is something that I would ask you to keep in mind. Now, that brings us to the end of our presentation. That's me, and that's how you can contact me. You can check on our BrainSet formula website and learn a little bit more about BrainSet if you're interested in that. It's a new website, so we're still building content into it, but there's enough there for you to have a read and see what's available for us. You can also see the other two trainers that I've trained that are also training people in BrainSet across the world. And we do work globally, either online or face-to-face. Always face-to-face is always nice, but sometimes it's not possible. So we work online too. And that's how you can contact me. I notice that there's a couple of comments in the chat box, so I'm just going to see what they are. Okay, so we're just finishing now. And I thank you for your participation today. And I hope you enjoyed this session about technologies and the brain and the environment and how we can harmonise all of it. Thanks, everybody.